Welcome to Wednesday Wanderings. My name is Mark Long, rector of the parish of St Andrew in Newlands, Cape Town. Last week I mentioned how sad our church building seemed to feel, that the sadness seemed to leach out of the stones in the walls. You'll notice behind me that there are flowers once again, and it was a real joy on Saturday to walk in and just to smell the fresh cut flowers. Something very special about that. And so a sense of renewed joy as we were able to meet on Sunday and gather once again. The reality of COVID-19, lockdown, and all that it's brought to our lives is huge disruption on so many levels. And even as we gather with numbers still climbing a bit here in the Western Cape, something of the vagaries of this time really do seem to stand out. But as always, I think it's important to just return to Scripture or allow ourselves to be reminded of the goodness of God's love and God's presence in our world. That despite all the hardships and hurt and death and trauma that we experience on a number of different levels, that nonetheless God is with us. I'd love it if God would just wave a magic wand and all these things would disappear. But that's not the promise of Scripture. The promise of Scripture is that God will be with us in it all, that he will be here to carry the load with us, to be yoked with us, to share the burdens, and to give us the resources and the resilience we need in the moments when we need it. I was encouraged by the gospel reading in today's Eucharist lectionary readings, Matthew 15:21 to 28, Jesus' interaction with the Syrophoenician woman. In the NRSV, she's referred to as the Canaanite woman, clearly somebody who wasn't considered to be Jewish, who comes requesting of Jesus that he heal her daughter, whose life is consumed by an evil spirit. What intrigues me about the story is that it obviously pushed Jesus into a place of discomfort, or needed him at least to just reconsider what he considered his call to be. And I note that he starts off by not responding to her at all. The disciples eventually get irritated with her and say to him, send her away. She's just a Canaanite. And Jesus' response, interestingly, is to say, my call is to those who are the lost sheep of Israel. And clearly that would have excluded this Canaanite Syrophoenician woman. But he kind of states that, and you see a process of thought and reflection going on in it. And having said that, he then actually engages with her, largely because she refuses to not let him engage with her and insists that he interacts by coming and just kneeling before him and just saying, I need you to heal my daughter. And Jesus then has that interaction. They talk about she says, even dogs get the crumbs that fall off the table. And Jesus is clearly really struck by her level of faith and trust in God's ability to work through him in this critical need of her life. And he is amazed by her faith and gives her the gift she seeks. And we hear that her daughter is healed immediately. Now, I think a few things there, but the one is that Jesus clearly in this interaction is forced to rethink his calling. Who is it that he is called to reach out to? And although he perceives it to be primarily, and this is true of Matthew's gospel, primarily to the Israelites or to the people of Israel, as he's faced with this woman's need and her desperate plea for help, he recognizes that, in fact, all that he is called to does not exclude her need in that moment. And while that may not be his ongoing focus to reach beyond the people of Israel, in this particular moment, he's able to reach out and give her the healing, or give her daughter the healing that she needs. And I think for me, just a reminder there for us in our own Christian lives as we seek to live our faith in the nature of daily life, is that we may have perceptions of how God, or what God is calling us to, and where and how God will work. But there will be instances like this interaction between Jesus and the Canaanite woman that will cause us to think, to stop and reflect, and perhaps subsequently act differently. And intriguingly, as Jesus reaches out to this woman in the broader breadth of the Gospels, she's not the only non-Israelite that he interacts with. And there's this growing sense that all that God is doing is not just for the people of Israel, but it's actually for all human beings. And today we would acknowledge that, in fact, God's desire reaches beyond that to the fullness of creation. We're heading towards September, which is a month in which we focus on creation in our worship. And important to recognize that God is not limited. We may seek to limit God, but God is not limited. And for me, that's really helpful because it suggests that no matter what we're dealing with, God is available to walk with us, to be with us, to strengthen us, and to give us the resilience we need for whatever it is that we face in the present moment or may face in the future. So a call to faith, a call to trust deeply in the presence of God, in the goodness of God, in the purposes of God, and ourselves to be available to that, and to allow the fullness of God to work in and through us for our greater good and to God's greater glory.